Your world, your challenges, your faith. When faith within engages the world without, there's power. It's living life from the inside out.
We wear masks these days to protect the people around us. But as the people of God living through a pandemic, are there other ways we can show compassion in our everyday encounters? And could the way we learn to treat others in this time help us grow in Christian maturity? We'll talk about all of that today here on the Family Life Inside Out podcast. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and my guest today is Michelle Van Loon, someone who, in the past few months, has learned even more about what it means to be vulnerable. She's a blogger and the author of multiple books. Her brand new book is titled Becoming Sage, Cultivating Maturity, Purpose, and Spirituality at Midlife. Welcome back to Inside Out, Michelle.
I'm so glad to be here with you and your listeners. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to hear your perspective on things. I know that there are so many lessons we're going to pull from living through this pandemic. We're going to pull them out. We're going to be able to digest them. But right now, there's only a few that I think that I'm seeing. And one of them is the awareness that you don't know from the outside, from looking at somebody, you don't know who is medically vulnerable. You know, people don't go around with signs saying, I have diabetes or I take immunosuppressant drugs. Now, Michelle, your immune system doesn't work very well. I mean, that's something that you've told me. And that makes you vulnerable to all kinds of infectious diseases, not just COVID-19. What would you like people with healthy immune systems to know that they might not have thought of before?
This is a question I've been dying to have someone ask me.
Oh.
A few years ago, I was diagnosed with a syndrome called common variable immune deficiency. Mm-hmm. The name makes it sound like, well, it's common, like the common cold. But it's only given that name because it's the most common of the rare immunodeficiencies. Mm. 1 in every 25 to 50,000 people has this diagnosis, and most doctors will never see a case of it in their practice. Mm. So I was misdiagnosed for many, many years as just somebody who got sick a lot. When I was diagnosed, I quickly learned that I was going to have to change my way of life with lots of hand sanitizer and using masks when I flew during flu season.
Oh my.
And staying away from big crowds, you know, like in a great big church or going to see a play or even a movie, particularly during cold and flu season, because other people get colds and then they get over them. And when I get a cold, it usually turns into bronchitis or sinusitis or pneumonia. Mm-hmm. And some of the treatment that I am now receiving helps my body fight stuff off, but I have no barrier to stop a germ from coming into my body. There's no first-line defense. Well, one thing that occurred to me early on when COVID-19 first started making headlines earlier this year was that everyone is in the same boat that I am. No one has any defense or immunity to this virus that is traveling around and spreading like wildfire. Mm-hmm. Everyone is in some ways immunodeficient right now, at least to this virus. Even the people that get sick and recover, they're still trying to make sense at this point of how long the antibodies will stay in the body. You know, whether people can be reinfected again, all of that is still trying to be discerned right now.
Right.
So we are all experiencing in some ways what my life is like always. Mm-hmm. And that's not, there's no glee in saying that because I don't want anyone to have my life, you know, the hand sanitizer, mask wearing, social distancing, often isolating kind of life. But yet here we are. And we know that not all immunodeficient people with chronic illness, people that are recovering from cancer, chemo patients, not everyone looks like a patient.
Mm-hmm.
We might just look like your neighbor or your friend or your bagger at the grocery store. But we are everywhere. And if there's one thing that this particular moment in time has shown us, it's that there are vulnerable people everywhere. They're not just in nursing homes and hospitals, but they might be delivering your mail. Pay attention to what God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you, including those invisible people.
The people who are vulnerable that have been around me the entire time, right? I would not have known. And it may only be because they tell me something or that I don't see them because they're staying even more isolated than I am because of this. So we're all wearing masks. We're learning about hand sanitizer. We're wiping things down. Those of us who can be out a little bit more. But how would you encourage the people that even that is not enough for you to live as full of an outdoor life with other people as you might want to or as you might have once done?
Well, I don't have an easy answer to that because there are no easy answers, sadly. So those of us who are navigating, and we're all navigating the uncertainty about how long this will last, there is no returning to normal. We can't reset the clock or the odometer back to last October when we were able to go and have coffee with a friend and not even think about it, maybe not wash our hands, and, all of those things. We are all grieving collectively and individually. Some of us whose lives are impacted, we may not be able to see our family for a long time. I'm not sure when I'm going to see my family again. They're in different states, and I really am unsure how to navigate questions of travel right now. That to recognize that we are grieving and that there is great sadness over big losses and small. A camp that you may have cherished attending every year that was canceled, for example. That's a big source of sorrow. But the small sorrows of that cup of coffee with a friend that is not happening in the same way or without carrying measure of risk is big. So to acknowledge that the grief is there, not to diminish it, but to turn and to face it and to honor what has been lost is a big one. For me, also, those of us who are immunocompromised can find that the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, where we are asking the Father to give us this day our daily bread. For me, underlining this day in that word, in that prayer, keeps turning my mind to, I just have to stay in today, that some of the planning and some of my hopes and ideas for the future have to just be planted firmly in this day as much as possible. It's not entirely possible, but that focus on today has helped me be able to enjoy some of the gifts of that day, even though they come in a very different package than I'm used to opening.
So I hear you saying that for those who have maybe more robust immune systems, the idea of honoring the losses and the sacrifice of those who are not able to do, even if we're feeling limited, let's say the people who are able to go out more, to honor that there are people who cannot, and that is a loss. Don't forget that's a real experience, a lived experience right now, and for who knows how much longer, experience of people who are dearly loved by God and by us, and to not forget that. Michelle, your newest book, Becoming Sage, it aims to help people in midlife cultivate maturity, purpose, and spirituality. How might some of the principles in the book, some of the principles and lessons help any of us during COVID-19, no matter our age? I guess what I'm asking is, how might we grow in maturity through this pandemic?
Well, here's another feel-good message. This is probably why I'll never be asked to do a TED Talk. Because the truth is that we are all experiencing pruning, whether we're a church leader that is having to figure out how to do church differently and be the church in these times, whether we're a mom trying to figure out how to work and what our children's school year is going to look like coming up. We are all being pruned and changed. And it looks a lot like loss and death. Pruning always does. You taking a perfectly healthy-looking plant sometimes and just whacking it down to just a stub. Mm-hmm. But that pruning is what creates greater fruitfulness. So on one hand, being able to think, give us this day our daily bread, Lord, and to stay in the day, but to also recognize that something is being cultivated that's a long-term kind of growth if we're willing to cooperate with God. And I bet if I could put a microphone in a plant, no plant would ever say, boy, that pruning really felt great.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It does not. And we who are being pruned right now, it doesn't feel good, particularly for those who are immunocompromised, who were already perhaps living a smaller life than they might have dreamed, a more landlocked, homebound kind of life. This may feel like more of the same, but there is opportunity for growth and fruitfulness in these times of testing and trial that don't come in the same form when everything's going hunky-dory.
Well, Michelle, speaking of, how would you encourage those who are listening right now who are feeling vulnerable? They either are medically vulnerable or because of the circumstances are feeling that kind of vulnerability that comes from a changed world.
I have a friend who is a college professor, and she's a single woman. She has some health concerns, and so she's been isolated since March. So when I think of my own situation, I have my husband and I've got some neighbors that respect my diagnosis and, will chat or visit from a distance. So I'm not quite as isolated, but there are people among us, people listening to this, who are really, really isolated. And that isolation, it goes from painful to possibly causing some mental health issues and breakdowns because we aren't meant to be a bunch of individual islands. And so I guess my word of encouragement is that it may feel like pushing a boulder up a hill, but to do what you can from where you are to reach out, whether you're in great health or whether you are in very fragile health, to be able to say to someone else, I'm having a hard time, I need a friend, and to be able to reach out. Now, we all know the internet can be a huge cesspool and time suck and just a mess. We can swim in a cesspool there. But the technology can also bring voices and ideas into our isolation and help connect us with people in our church, people that live far away, and anything that we can do to break through that wall, even if it's virtually, is a vote for good health. That is the fertilizer that a pruned plant needs, is community and connection. And I need it myself.
And so for those who are feeling a little less vulnerable, there's also a call to be doing that reaching back or doing the first reach out for someone that is very isolated.
Yep.
So that's an encouragement for both, those who are feeling less vulnerable and those who are feeling especially vulnerable.
We are all vulnerable. if we've all learned something, we have no defense against this invisible thing that may feel far away from some of your listeners' lives and experiences. Some parts of the country are hit way harder than others at this particular point in time. But we, across the whole world, are on this new journey. And it's not a journey anybody would have signed up to take. But we are all experiencing the effects of this, even if it feels far away at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And as I had an opportunity to speak with one of the tech people just before talking with you, we're not alone in it, even when we're isolated, because I think one of the things that I have learned, and I'm not in exactly the same position you're in, but one of the things I've learned is that it is easy when sailing along last October, let's say, having that coffee with a friend, to think that I control my schedule and that I can forecast and then execute my plans. And I have really never had control, and these are times when it becomes even more obvious that I haven't. But I know who has control. So
yes, absolutely. Amen to that. And that's the lesson of watching your young adult children launch into the world, and you discover, I actually thought I had more control over how the script of these lives was going to go, but I did not. And now we get to learn it at even a more deep level, whether we're parents or not, whether our parents are here with us or not, whether we've got medically fragile people in our worlds. We don't have control, but God is holding us.
Amen. Well, thank you, Michelle. It's always wonderful to speak with you. Thank you for your openness and your encouragement. And thank you for joining me again here on Inside Out.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening in to this Inside Out podcast. My guest has been blogger and author Michelle Van Loon. You'll find a link to her newest book, Becoming Sage, at fln.org/insideout. I'm Martha Manikas Foster with Inside Out on Family Life.